Number 1.
In December of 1957, 7-year-old Maria Ridulph disappeared from the sleepy town of Sycamore, Illinois. 5 months later, her body was found by a farmer and his wife under a down tree, CBS News reported. But the mystery of what happened to her persists to this day. Ridulph was playing with her best friend Kathy when a strange man named Johnny offered her a piggyback ride. Kathy went inside for a pair of gloves, and when she returned, both Ridulph and the man were gone. It was the last time Ridulph was seen alive. The search for Ridulph and her kidnapper turned into an FBI investigation. An early suspect was John Tessier, the son of a neighbor who the community described as creepy, according to Mystery Confidential. However, he passed a lie detector test and was cleared as a suspect. The case was passed to state police after Ridulph's body was found and went cold 2 years later. An unexpected lead came in 1994. When John Tessier's mother, Eileen, made a dying confession to her daughter Janet. Those 2 little girls, and the one that disappeared. John did it. John did it? And you have to tell someone, she said, via CNN. Janet knew her mother had lied and told police John was home the night Maria Ridulph disappeared. She reached out to the FBI and the Sycamore police and was rebuffed. Then, a decade later, she sent an email to the Illinois State Police, who took her claims seriously. Police traced Tessier to Seattle, Washington, where he was living as Jack McCullough. According to CBS News, he was arrested and convicted of the murder in 2011, according to Reuters. At the time, it was the oldest cold case to go to trial. His conviction hinged on the fact that Kathy identified him from a yearbook photo, and this additional evidence punched a hole in his alibi. He was supposed to have been in Chicago for a military physical when the kidnapping took place. However, investigators found an unused train ticket dated December 3, 1957. At his girlfriend's home, putting his journey in doubt. 4 years later, however, new evidence overturned McCullough's conviction. Records proved he had called an Air Force recruiting station from a payphone in Rockford, Illinois, at the time of the kidnapping. During an interview with Reuters, DeKalb County State's Attorney Richard Schmack said it's a manifest impossibility for McCullough to have kidnapped Ridulph in Sycamore. As of today, Ridulph's tragic disappearance remains a mystery.
Number 2.
There is new light in a dark mystery that has haunted the Jay County city of Portland for as long as people can remember. 69 years ago this month, school teacher Garnet Ginn was found dead in a garage she rented just half a block from the police station. After all these years, detectives have a new lead they believe puts them closer to finding a killer. It's our biggest cold case, and there's still a lot of interest, said Police Chief Nathan Springer. He and investigator Todd Wicke are putting new heat on the oldest and coldest cases. They took us along on their first trip into the 69-year-old crime scene. The car was right over there, Wicke said as he pointed to a pile of debris. The 1949 Pontiac belonged to Garnet Ginn. In 1950, she was found dead hanging from a sewing machine belt tied to a door handle. There it is, he said as he focused his camera on a broken wall support that appeared in a death scene photograph. He believes it may have snapped in a life and death struggle. Up above he pointed to old wooden planks, resting on the ceiling joists. They fit a description in a new tip recently given to police. He would have been up there waiting, and as soon as the car stopped, boom. That was how Wicke described a death that would make headlines, stymie police and stir up controversy for decades. To this day, I can understand why people might be scared, concerned, said Chief Springer. Chief Springer grew up hearing the stories of Ginn, a home economics teacher at Portland High School, single and dead at the age of 33. First it was a suicide, then it was murder, then it was suicide again, he explained. According newspapers, police immediately assumed suicide. The body was removed before the coroner arrived, but according to the death certificate, it was ruled death by strangulation. She was happy. She was working on her master's degree, said former newspaper reporter Chris Kennedy. As a Portland native, Kennedy spent decades researching Ginn's death. There was kind of a stigma to it that there had been a big cover-up taken place, said Kennedy. According to newspaper reports scoured by Kennedy and others, Ginn was a successful, well-liked teacher, excited about living on her own, and proud of her nearly new car. She was last seen alive leaving at a sorority meeting at the local country club. Ginn's friends told reporters she had $40 a lot of money in 1950, and offered to buy everyone soft drinks when she left the meeting. Ginn was found the next morning by the school superintendent, who was checking to see why she wasn't at work. Her wallet was gone. Driver's license was gone. Clearly foul play, said Kennedy. Weeks later, Ginn's family had her body exhumed. An autopsy found she was beaten, most likely knocked unconscious by 7 blows to her head. On the death certificate, the word homicide faintly appears above unknown as a manner of death. She was ambushed and she was strangled and killed, and the suicide was staged by the killer, said Wiki. Local and state police launched a belated death investigation. By then, gawkers had trampled though what was to become a crime scene. Based on newspaper accounts, it appears as if the car and other evidence were not safely secured nor handled properly. And in 1950, police training, procedures, evidence handling and forensic sciences were nothing close to what they are today. The Jay County Historical Society preserved boxes of newspaper clippings. One shows state police examining Ginn's torn jacket and soiled gloves. Another one has a picture of the sewing machine belt. According to one article, investigators had a couple of unnamed suspects and found blood on Ginn's car. There were probably fingerprints and important clues that didn't make the papers. Unfortunately, today's investigators are building their case on faded articles and memories, because there is no physical evidence of the horror that occurred in this garage almost 70 years ago. It all seems to have disappeared. Nothing in notes, autopsy report, blood samples, coat, gloves or crime scene photos until now. Police recently received information indicating they may have been looking in the wrong places for that critical evidence. New searches are now underway. If we have evidence, our forensics are so much better. Maybe we can find DNA to help solve this, said Chief Springer. Police participated in public meetings and a radio call-in show, asking for help solving the unsolved murder. The tactic worked. A woman who apparently kept silent for most of her life contacted police. She knew Ginn and provided details about the actual crime scene and a possible killer. I do have a person of interest, and I've researched that individual, said Wiki. The man who is now deceased, but the investigator believes he knew Ginn. Something went wrong between the two of them, he said. This person was lying in wait. That's the information I've gotten. That person was waiting on her in that garage, and for good reason. Over the years, people looking to solve the murder have been threatened. Chief Springer has heard them, telling them, "You better stop if you know what's good for you," he said. Little comments like that coming in. As a newspaper reporter, Kennedy got the same message. "I was definitely threatened with my job," she explained. Solving the deadly mystery would give Portland the answers it's wanted for decades, and perhaps clear the names of those rumored to be connected to the killing. Some of those people that's lived with people talking behind their backs for many years, said Chief Springer. Newspapers had a field day reporting the crime and mishandled investigation. They offered rewards for information. One paper had a female employee reenact Ginn's death. She posed for a photo with a noose around her neck and tied to a car door handle. Kennedy wants a young woman's dignity and reputation restored. She was an unassuming, quiet woman who did her job, and she died, and she became a focus of such a scandal and sensationalism, she said. And for friends and relatives, a loved one they laid to rest could finally rest in peace.
Number 3.
It was a typical summer day in 1967. Leota Camp kissed a goodbye to her husband, Ray, as he went off to his job at the Iowa Employment Security Commission. Like the many other stay-at-home mothers in the working-class Des Moines neighborhood on Fleming Avenue, a block east of Lower Beaver Road, she had housework to do and children to supervise. Brenda, 3, and Kevin, 4, played in the backyard as Camp hung laundry on the line, leaving to check on her 3-month-old, Christine, inside. It was getting close to noon. Brenda and Kevin grew hungry and went inside to ask their mother for lunch. What they found was a horror, one that 48 years later still has no answers. Their mother, Leota, was in the front bedroom, lying face down on the bed, her hands tied behind her back and legs tied together at the ankles with men's neckties, while another was used as a gag. A knife protruded from her bloodied back. "My brother pulled the knife out of her back," said Brenda, Camp Conklin, who today lives in West Des Moines. "They ran, screaming, to the neighbor, Mary Grow. Mommy's bleeding," Kevin yelled. Grow soon saw Camp on the bed and rushed out to get another neighbor, Nell Edwards. The two women found Leota still moaning. with 4 stab wounds an inch apart down her spinal column. According to Des Moines Register archives, they called the police. Little Christine lay in the next room on a white blanket, nursing on a bottle, unharmed. Chuck Grow was summoned by his wife to notify Ray Camp at work. "He didn't want to tell me," Camp said. "He told me there had been an accident with Leota, and I should go to Broadlawns." Despite emergency responders' attempts to revive her during the short ride to Broadlawns Polk County Public Hospital, Leota Camp, 25, had already died. A neighbor told police of seeing a man in his 20s, about 5'9" with a stocky build, and wearing a white and brown plaid shirt and blue jeans, driving a black Ford Mustang to the street, before walking in the direction of the Camp's home. According to the Des Moines Police Department's report, it was a shocking crime in broad daylight. In the months that followed, mothers in the neighborhood walked with their heads down, looking for missed evidence, while children frantically ran inside their homes when they saw any Mustang drive down the street. Detectives in 1967 told the Register that they were digging hard and fast, but there didn't appear to be a motive. Camp wasn't sexually assaulted, and nothing was missing from the home. Police would never find the man. The case went cold. Sergeant Jason Halifax, a Des Moines police spokesman, said detectives most familiar with the case are retired or dead, although the department looked into a tip as recently as 2008. The memory of the murder hasn't gone cold for neighbors or the family. Conklin remembers sitting on her father's lap, hearing the news of her mother's death and the numbness she felt at the funeral. Her father offered a reward and, for 4 years, consulted with police on any new developments. Finally, the family moved on and rarely talked about it. "I was angry for a long time, and then maybe drank more than I should. Then I figured out that wasn't going to do anything for me or my children," said Ray Camp, today 73 and living in Johnston. "I got over it and buried myself in my work, and tried to spend as much time as I could with the children." All Conklin had was stories of her mother's life, a farm girl from Missouri, who was an honor student in high school and grew up in a religious home. "She had one of the best memories of Bible verses of anyone I knew," Ray Camp said. "She was kind and concerned about other people and a very loving mother with her children." The family never returned to the house on Fleming Avenue. Conklin still has never driven past it. "It affected me when I got her age and had my own kids," Conklin said. "I always felt like I should go look at the police file." It wasn't until she approached her 50s that she finally got the thick file, and, coincidentally, got a call from a man in Maryland who had studied the life of serial criminal James Mitchell Debordelibin, who was sentenced to life in prison after a series of murders and other crimes, and died in 2011. "The police sketch of the man in the Mustang," he said, "matched Debordelibin. A former neighbor of the Camps has other ideas." Carol Wuetherich lived a few houses away from the Camps and drove by the house around noon, on the way to buy a new car, leaving her children with a babysitter who told her the news when she came home. "I think of it every day," she said. "I think it was meant for me." Wuetherich of Norwood, Minnesota, is convinced it was a mistake by a hitman. "I had a gut feeling my life was in danger. I went to a dog pound and got a German Shepherd for protection. That is how afraid I was." 4 years ago, Wuetherich said she went to police with the story and the incriminating details, and was told instead they'd been checking people Camp went to school with. In 1967, authorities told the Des Moines Register the killer was a cook or pervert who got scared and panicked. Conklin said she learned early on in her life that evil exists and life is fleeting. She used to worry the man was hurting other people, but what nagged at her into middle age was the mystery. She wants to know who did it. Before her are the copies of a huge police file that have so far told her nothing. Anyone with information about Leota Camp's unsolved murder is asked to contact the Des Moines Police Department at 515-283-4869.
Number 4.
2 file drawers full of crime scene documents, interviews and letters. That's what Don Wilson has left of his niece, Kelly Lynn Albright, who was murdered at age 12 more than 52 years ago in Reno County. It's one of a few local unsolved homicide cases, and although law enforcement believes her killer died in jail, 80-year-old Wilson, along with others close to Albright, are working so that when he leaves this earth, his niece's case won't be forgotten. Wilson began researching Albright's case around the same time his wife, Glorian, died in 2006. Glorian was the sister of Albright's mother, And while those who know Wilson say the research is a way to stay close to his deceased wife, Wilson explains his fervor for the case differently. "I just think after over 52 years, she deserves some closure," he said via email. Wilson, who now lives in Sarasota, Florida, corresponds by email and letters. A former B-52 pilot, he doesn't hear well on the phone, he said. Around the same time he began researching his niece's case, he connected with two of her former McCandless Elementary School classmates and close friends, Linda Kirby and Rona Smith. Independently, Smith had been investigating Albright's death for decades. Kirby was just beginning her search for closure. Both Kirby and Smith recalled Albright as a beautiful girl with a bright future. They remember going swimming at the pool and playing on the swing set with her. The brutality of her death, however, deeply shaped their lives. On September 17, 1970, Albright went missing from her mother and stepfather's home. 4 days later, a local farmer found the young girl's naked body, raped and stabbed 18 times in a sorghum field. No one was ever arrested or charged. Albright's mother offered to give both girls her daughter's clothes after she died. Both declined. Kirby's family moved to Pretty Prairie, hoping to make a home in a safer community and away from the memories of Albright. Kirby steeled her mind to block out what happened to her friend and never spoke of Kelly Albright until she was in her 20s. What brought Kirby, Smith and Wilson together could be no coincidence, Kirby said. After visiting Albright's grave at Yoder Mennonite Cemetery for the first time in 2008, she felt a call to action to try and bring justice for her deceased friend. Wilson, who had already spoken with Smith, contacted her. The three formed a partnership decades in the making. "I just didn't pick that day to go to the cemetery. It happened for a reason that we were all brought together," she said. "The common goal wasn't to get publicity or to write a book and make money. The goal was to get justice for Albright. The common belief is that Glenn Davis, a friend of the family, killed Albright," said Reno County Sheriff's Captain Steve Lutz. Davis was never arrested because all of the evidence against him was circumstantial, Lutz said. That included a neighbor recalling his vehicle in the area the day Albright was missing, Davis allegedly deep cleaning his car the day after she went missing, and interviews with several of his family members. In 1995, Davis was convicted of aggravated incest, aggravated indecent liberties with a child, and aggravated indecent liberties with a child, less than 14 in Sedgwick County, and sent to prison. 2 years after his conviction, Davis died in prison from health problems. Knowing he was in poor health and believing they may be able to get a dying proclamation of guilt, Lutz said officers were on their way to the prison. However, he died the day before they were scheduled to arrive. Wilson, Smith, and Kirby don't deny that Davis may have killed Albright, but they also believe there's more to the story than that. All three, as well as others, point to a close relative of Albright's as a suspect. They didn't come to this conclusion casually. In the last 7 years, Wilson has spent literally thousands of hours speaking to everyone connected to the case, from investigators to suspects. He's knocked on doors, sent letters to the media, and corresponded dozens of times with various law enforcement agencies. The interviews the three have conducted with family members and friends of Albright have led them to believe that the close relative, who still lives in Reno County, was involved. They also point to the person's violent and erratic past behavior as supporting evidence, as well as letters about the man between family members that Wilson, Kirby, and Smith have read. It's the same for Kirby and Smith, although both say Wilson is the driving force behind their effort. When typing Kelly Lynn Albright into a search engine, posts by Wilson pop up on multiple sites, spreading information he knows about the case, memorializing Albright and asking for help. He even found the daughter of Glenn Davis on one web forum and asked to speak to her. She did not reply. The three raise numerous questions. Why didn't investigators try to get a proclamation earlier? What happened to the DNA evidence that was lost between the Reno County Sheriff's Office and Kansas Bureau of Investigation? And why can't law enforcement at least speak to the person they believe had a part in her killing? It's never been solved, and it needs to be looked at seriously, Kirby said. Law enforcement has kind of washed their hands of it. Lutz said there was no conspiracy to hide evidence or leave the case unsolved. Nothing Wilson has sent him, he said, has been new information, and much of the lost evidence and mix-ups in the case can be attributed to the fact that law enforcement didn't have the methods in place that it does today to ensure nothing gets mixed up. I applaud their determination in the case, but you have to be objective about it, Lutz said. The only way the case is going to reopen, he said, is if a witness comes forward or someone else confesses. Although he said law enforcement can't act on the suspicions of Albright's friends and family, he does sympathize with them. Time heals all wounds, but it also keeps them festered. And while sometimes time allows people to forget, there's always going to be someone who won't, he said. Wilson remains hopeful. If he wins the lottery, he said, he'd put the money towards posting a large cash reward for information. I think someone out there knows something that could bring closure, he wrote. For the last several years, Wilson has posted notes on the anniversary of his niece's death and birthday on the message board he hosts for Albright on Findagrove.com. 43 years without closure and justice. We have not forgotten you, Kelly. Many people are still working to bring closure to the case, he wrote on September 18, 2013. Happy birthday, Kelly. You would have been 52 today. There are still a lot of people trying to bring closure to your case. Someone out there knows something, and hopefully the truth will surface. When flowers fall too soon, all the earth suffers, he posted on May 17, 2010. While Smith spent decades fighting law enforcement, she's trying to find peace in other ways now. Feeling as if she exhausted every avenue legally, she instead works to remember her friend by talking about her with anyone who asks. I've done what I know to do and I really am at peace about letting it go, she said. This spring, Smith, Kirby and other classmates will meet at Albright's grave and then share a meal together. They both hope Wilson, who has prostate and hip bone cancer, will make it. In a letter to the Hutchinson News, Wilson wrote that he won't ever stop researching his niece's case. I'll never stop until I take my last breath.
Number 5.
In 1965, Oneal Moore, one of the first 2 black deputy sheriffs in Louisiana's Washington Parish, was shot in a drive-by ambush while on patrol with his partner, Creed Rogers. The murder sparked an FBI investigation that spanned more than 5 decades. But while there was no secret about the identity of the prime suspects, all of whom were members of the Ku Klux Klan, no one has ever been charged in the crime. Author Stanley Nelson explores the case in his book Clan of Devils, the murder of a black Louisiana deputy sheriff, a finalist for the 2011 Pulitzer Prize in Local Reporting. Nelson spoke with A&E True Crime about what led to Moore's killing and why no justice has been served. It takes a special kind of brazenness to kill a police officer. What exactly led to the murder of Oneal Moore? During the 1960 and 1964 elections for sheriff in Washington Parish, the Klan ran its own candidate against Sheriff Dorman Crow. They used various tactics to try to beat him, but came up short both times. The Klan wanted its own man in office to preserve segregation. When Sheriff Crow was seeking re-election in 1964, he once again sought support from the black community and promised that if re-elected, he would hire 2 black deputies. When he was re-elected, he kept his promise and hired Oneal Moore and Creed Rogers, the first 2 black deputies in the history of the parish. The Klan was furious and vowed revenge. In the Claverns, local branches throughout the parish, there was talk on what to do about the deputies. That led to the Klan ambushing Moore and Rogers exactly a year and a day after the 2 deputies began their jobs. Moore was killed instantly in the shooting. Rogers was injured and lost an eye. To the Klan, it was an insult for a black man to have the ability to arrest a white man or worse, a white woman. It was the ultimate insult that a black man would have the power of the law behind him. The culprits were protected by the culture of silence and fear surrounding the Klan in Louisiana in the 1960s. Why did the Klan have such a stronghold on the area? Because most white people supported segregation wholeheartedly. The Klan offered an opportunity to preserve it. The Klan presented itself as a Christian organization that had to do certain things to support segregation. So many white people just looked away. But also, the Klan was made up of brutal men. Some had criminal records. Everyone feared them. One suspect in Moore's murder was Elmo Breland, who a few years later was convicted in the murder of a white man in Bogalusa, Louisiana. The Klan also beat and whipped white men who Klansmen felt weren't holding down a job or were drinking too much. If you talked bad about the Klan, They usually found out and you'd have a cross burned in your yard or you might be attacked. Klansmen wore hoods at certain public events, and they usually covered their faces on wrecking crew projects, violent actions undertaken by secret Klan hit squads, making the attacks even more horrific. The Invisible Empire invoked fear in anyone, including other Klansmen. A Bogalusa white woman's husband had been kidnapped and beaten by the Klan. She later told the newspaper in Bogalusa, "I used to think maybe there was some good to the Ku Klux Klan. But they're nothing but a pack of no-good devils." That's what they were. You obtained almost 40,000 pages of FBI and Department of Justice investigation documents pertaining to the Moore case. What were some of the biggest discoveries? It is always a thrill to see an FBI document that hasn't been read since it was filed away decades ago. Finding detailed reports on suspects, on-the-scene facts about the investigation and multiple other events is incredible. For instance, the FBI attempted to recreate the ambush with Rogers on the scene, but a crowd of onlookers showed up, and the FBI had to cancel the recreation. A cop in Bogalusa had tipped off the lawyer for the lead suspect, Klansman Ernest Ray McKelveen, and word got out. This led to an FBI investigation as to who tipped off the lawyer. The FBI learned that the tipster was Bogalusa Police Chief Claxton Knight. Lots of tidbits like this in the documents. You describe the FBI's investigation as creative. What do you mean by that? Not only did agents do their usual surveillance and questioning of suspects and eyewitnesses, but the Bureau also obtained phone records of Klansmen and wired informants on and off for decades. Their surveillance efforts were non-stop. Once an investigation of a subject began, 2 men confessed, on tape, to the murder. Why would that not be enough to charge them, even with a confession? If the FBI could not find corroborating evidence, such as a murder weapon, the Department of Justice, DOJ, felt that without solid supporting evidence, a defense attorney could cast reasonable doubt on a prosecution. The DOJ's case closure letter noted, "This laundry list of alleged perpetrators demonstrates the virtual impossibility of prosecuting this case even if someone were to confess to the crime. Of course, without taking such a case to court, we will never know whether someone could have been convicted." There was a latent print found on the pickup truck of one of the alleged Klansmen conspirators. Was that useful in any way? Was the technology at the time good enough? The fingerprint technology then was as good as it is now. The problem for the past 5 decades was that they could never match the print to a person, but the technology today would have made a big difference. Back then, there were no cell phones that could be tracked, and no GPS on vehicles. What led to the investigation reopening again in 1990, 2001 and 2007? New tips. And to the credit of the FBI, the Bureau followed every tip as far as they could take it. The FBI and DOJ investigated the case over the course of 51 years, from 1965 to 2016. Would it be fair to question the competence of the investigators? Were any stones left unturned? It was a thorough investigation, in my view. The FBI pounds the pavement and investigates, but they don't prosecute. Ultimately, the DOJ determined it couldn't prosecute anyone. As the book notes repeatedly, there were some very strong confessions and circumstantial evidence. What toll did the unsolved murder take on Moore's family, his surviving partner, Creed Rogers, and the larger black community in Washington Parish? For the families, it causes pain and suffering, and that never really goes away. There is a sense of loss, and you feel as if you are on an island all by yourself, and that nobody understands your situation. And that's true. For Creed Rogers, who retired as captain for the Sheriff's Department in 1988 and died in 2007, I think he felt some degree of survivor's guilt. The deputies rode in the same patrol car, and the week the 2 deputies were attacked, it was Moore's turn to drive. Rogers was seriously injured physically, but he also suffered emotionally. His and Moore's relationship was unique. They were civil rights pioneers in Washington Parish, as the first 2 black deputies. Plus, Rogers was a hero had he not quickly radioed in the attack, and described the pickup truck, noting there was a Confederate flag on it. McKelveen would never have been arrested an hour later in Mississippi. For the black community, this is another case of no justice. When the FBI reopened the case in the 1990s, agents got an earful. The Bureau noted that the black community believed the entire investigation was a cover-up. The black community feels cheated, and they feel the law enforcement, including the FBI, cannot be trusted.
Number 6.
A woman is looking for answers in her grandmother's death in Pender County. On Annie Anderson's 84th birthday, she was found shot to death in her home. It is a dark memory for Amber Merity, as she searches for the truth in her grandmother's death that remains unsolved. "My goodness," Merity said. "She was a spitfire." As Merity flips through old pictures of her grandmother, and as she reminisces about all the good times, she cannot help but think about the moment it all ended. "It was August 18, 2014. She always liked to go to the pirates' table. So every year we would go to the pirates' table," Merity said. Merity and her 2 daughters pulled up to Anderson's house off Morgan Road. "When I pull up, the house is dark," Merity said. As Merity walked up to the house, she noticed the glass pane on the door was broken. "I had this instinctive feeling that something was very wrong," Merity said. "My daughters were very scared. They begged me not to go in." After calling 911, deputies from the Pender County Sheriff's Office arrived and went inside. Found Mrs. Anderson inside, deceased at. Greg Cromartie said, "When they actually opened the door is when I saw her feet. And that's all I'm glad I ever did see," Merity said. Detective Greg Cromartie said Anderson was shot twice sometime in the middle of the night. "The shell casing broke the glass door. The evidence at the scene would show that she was shot immediately," Cromartie said. "There was no sign of a struggle." Merity said they did not know who did it, but what they did know is Anderson would not have opened the door for a stranger. "The evidence at the scene indicates that she opened the door to whoever shot her," Cromartie said. "That is not all they found from the evidence. There were signs in the house that someone had been looking for something," Cromartie said. "I feel like whoever did this knew her, knew she was alone, and knew exactly what she had and where she had it," Merity said. Merity said what Anderson had were things only a few people knew about. "There was a lot of very old jewelry," Merity said. "They were family heirlooms that were never found. Some of the pieces of jewelry consisted of diamond and sapphire ring," Cromartie said. "I believe there was 3 stones of each on the ring. A gold watch, an old pocket watch, several gold rings that the stones at some point had been removed, as well as a bag of old silver coins." Cromartie said at first, tips poured into the sheriff's office. A lot of phone calls. A lot of people offering information and tips that we followed up, Cromartie said. Of course, as things progressed, information dried up. It was a day that was supposed to be a celebration that turned into a nightmare. She did not deserve her final moments to be in this fear that it was, Merity said. Nobody deserves that. A nightmare that continues as detectives look for the missing piece in the investigation. What we're hoping is that there is somebody out there that might have information that can help us bring this investigation to a conclusion. Cromartie said, the information could be connected to the missing jewelry. Anyone that bought, around that time, any jewelry that they, looking back, maybe would consider suspicious circumstances, Cromartie said. They need any kind of information that could bring Merity the justice she has been searching for. Everybody says there will be justice on God's time. But I'm in the flesh, and I would like to see justice here on earth, Merity said. If you have any information about this case, please contact the Pender County Sheriff's Office at 910-259-1212.
Number 7.
About 4:30 p.m. on March 25, 1969, Mary Kay Heese was seen having a cup of hot chocolate at the Wigwam Cafe in downtown Wahoo. The Wahoo High School junior was alone. Shortly after that, and again alone, she was seen near the church at the corner of 7th and Linden Streets. A little after 5 p.m., Heese was still by herself and seen at the corner of 5th and Linden Streets, only about 5 blocks from her home. That ended the public sightings of the 17-year-old. Later that evening, her parents reported her as missing. During the early morning hours of March 26, her body was found in a roadside ditch, about 3.5 miles southeast of Wahoo. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the murder of the Wahoo youth, and remains one of the oldest open murder cases in the state. According to newspaper reports at the time, investigators stated the teen had been driven to the out-of-town location, and the murder probably occurred there. It was believed that a sharp instrument was used as the murder weapon, and that a struggle had taken place. An autopsy revealed she had died of multiple stab wounds to the stomach. Heese was found fully clothed, except for her shoes. The shoes, a brown paper sack and some books were near the body. Evidence was gathered and multiple tips were called in by concerned citizens, but the case has not been solved. When the news broke of her murder in 1969, Dan Givens, a classmate of Heese, said it sent a shock wave through the community. "I remember the day I found out she died," he said. "I was shocked she was murdered." Ginn said he last saw her during lunch on March 25. Wahoo High School, then located where the Wahoo Civic Center is today, had an open campus policy. Students could leave to go get their lunch. Givens had walked over to Safeway, then the grocery store where Wahoo Super is today, to pick up a few items for lunch. He said he talked to Heese, who had purchased an apple for her lunch. "I didn't know that would be the last time I would see her," he recalled. It was the sight of her books laying on the county road that alerted a farmer to what happened that fateful day. The farmer went into Wahoo to notify law enforcement, and a short search revealed the teen's body. The county attorney at that time was Robert Sullivan. The now deceased prosecutor told the Wahoo newspaper 30 years after the murder that a lot of leads seemed hopeful in the days that followed the discovery. "This is a small community. A lot of people notice strange and unusual activity," he said in 1999. But none led to a murder weapon or to a killer. New leads in the case have also been reported over the years. A grant for DNA testing breathed new life into the case in 2006, but by 2009, the case again was collecting dust. It was announced in 2014 that an individual with new information had come forward, but no information was made public about possible suspects, and no arrests have been made. Saunders County Attorney Joe Dobish said last week the case remains open in his office. "We're actively investigating and following up on new leads," he said. He declined to comment beyond that. He said the focus this week should be on the memory of Heese. Givens agrees. He said the community should be getting to know the grandchildren she should have been allowed to have, rather than recalling her death. It has always bothered him that her murder has not been solved. Givens said he didn't know Heese well, but remembers her as a sweet girl. "I want her to be remembered. She was a nice person. She didn't deserve this," he said. "I want to know who did it and why."